This is an NBC News special report. Here is Tom Brokaw.
September 11th, the year 2001, a day unlike any other in the long course of American history, a terrorist act of war against this country.
Information is pouring into our newsroom from everywhere.
Defended.
A series of coordinated terror strikes today at this country, its people,
such a
our freedom.
devastating and damaging attack.
The revolution of broadcast journalism for the first time not only helped to spread the daily news, but brought a face and a steady voice to us in some of the most iconic moments in American and world history. When thinking about broadcast journalism today, many recognize names like Brian Williams from NBC or favorite Sunday morning newscasts. News information has grown immensely. From local papers delivered every morning to the family huddling close around the radio, the news has captivated the common people for centuries. As the years went by, broadcast media became more useful, especially during World War II.
This is Munich, Germany calling. The last 11th hour attempt to save the peace of Europe and avert a world war over the Sudeten muddle has just begun here in Munich.
1938 was the year of crisis. That's William L. Shirer's familiar voice.
Senior Mussolini, Mr. Daladier, and Mr. Chamberlain are meeting in the Führerbau.
But even radio wouldn't compare to the impact that the television would have on how we understood the news and who we trusted to deliver both happy and tragic events.
This is educational television. It is 9 years old, quite young in the annals of education. But then television itself is but new come to being. This afternoon there were 67 stations in the country. Tonight, this becomes the 68th. In time, there will be over 200 such stations. It will, in short, be the development of a new fourth television network, serving all the peoples of the 50 states that are this land.
The earliest news broadcasts transported families to a world where they felt anchored by the voices they relied on. Programs like Richard Hubble and the News, Camel News and the Caravan, and the Huntley-Brinkley Report brought the news and information beyond our local doorsteps.
Chet Huntley, NBC News, New York.
And David Brinkley, NBC News, Washington.
Israel today accepted the American plan for peace in the Middle East, a week after Egypt did, 5 days after Jordan.
In the 1950s, broadcast journalism was revolutionized with the invention of the television. Broadcasting journalism brought the voices and the images of men we respected and chose to invite in our living rooms, like Walter Cronkite.
This is Walter Cronkite in our newsroom, and there has been an attempt, as perhaps you know now, on the life of President Kennedy. He was wounded in an automobile driving from Dallas Airport into downtown Dallas, along with Governor Connolly of Texas. They've been taken to Parkland Hospital there, where their condition is as yet unknown.
Another crucial event that called for the need of broadcasting media was the death of President John F. Kennedy. President John F. Kennedy's death marks yet another significant date in the evolution of broadcasting media. His death was broadcasted by various stations such as NBC and CBS on a 4-day marathon of the events after his death. Kennedy's death was broadcasted entirely from the filming of his body to the death of Lee Harvey Oswald to documentaries about his life as a president. Ultimately, the broadcasting of Kennedy's death united America as a whole and focused our attentions on a crucial event in history. It showed the world that broadcasting media had the ability to unify the nation on its feet.
Good evening. Dr. Martin Luther King, the apostle of nonviolence in the civil rights movement, has been shot to death in Memphis, Tennessee.
The date's now indelible. It's going to be remembered as long as man survives. July 20th, 1969, the day man reached and walked on the moon.
I'm Sander Van Oker, NBC News.
I'm Charles Warren, Mutual News.
I'm Stuart Novins, CBS News.
Bob Fleming, ABC News.
The first question to Senator Kennedy from Mr. Fleming.
Senator, the Vice President in his campaign has said that you are naive and at times immature. He has raised the question of leadership. On this issue, why do you think people should vote for you rather than the vice president?
Senator Robert F. Kennedy, Democrat of New York, versus Senator Eugene J. McCarthy, Democrat of Minnesota, appearing in their first official confrontation on ABC News Issues and Answers, a special report. To moderate this joint appearance, ABC News anchorman Frank Reynolds.
Good evening. Tonight, two declared aspirants for the presidential nomination of the Democratic Party are in the same room before the same television cameras and radio microphones to engage in a discussion, or if you will, a debate on the issues, problems, and the opportunities that confront the American people this year.
He apparently fired all of the 8 shots in the magazine of a .22 caliber revolver. Those shots taking effect in Senator Kennedy and 4 other persons, as far as we have been able to determine, with some still rather confused reports and incomplete identification on all of the others wounded.
The newest troops in South Vietnam for the United States. This is part of their first heavy action.
Like most of our troops, they have been taught to depend on firepower. And depend on it they do.
Vietnam was the first television war. Broadcasting media enabled the violent attacks and events to take place in the living rooms of many worried Americans. Ultimately, the broadcasting of the war helped to amplify anti-war movements. In 1972, during the North Vietnamese Spring Offensive, the audience witnessed the aftermath of a napalm strike, in which South Vietnamese planes mistook their own fleeing civilians for North Vietnamese troops. Furthermore, in attempting to spread the events of the violent war back home, broadcast journalists sacrificed their lives on the front. In fact, 9 network personnel died in Indochina, and many more were wounded. One famous broadcast during wartime was Walter Cronkite's report on the Tet Offensive. On February 1968, Cronkite reported a broadcast titled Report from Vietnam, Who, What, When, Where, Why, in which he expressed his view that the war was unwinnable.
That the only rational way out then will be to negotiate, not as victims, but as an honorable people who lived up to their pledge to defend democracy and did the best they could. This is Walter Cronkite. Good night.
President Lyndon Johnson watched the broadcast and was immediately moved by it. President Johnson declared that he knew at that moment he would have to change course. In fact, David Halberstam, a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist, said, "It was the first time in American history a war had been declared over by an anchorman." Cronkite's report on the Tet Offensive shows how powerful broadcasting journalism was, because it had the ability to influence some of the most powerful people, including the president. Not only were our trusted faces reporting the news, but they also became interactive by asking questions on our behalf. This would reform the relationship between the public and their politicians. In response to the different effects of television on society throughout history, Mitchell Stevens of NYU's School of Journalism said, "Television is much more powerful than the mid-20th century, as it has spread not only into every home in America, and probably into the majority of homes around the world, but not into many rooms in each home. Americans and people around the world now spend, on average, most of their awake, non-working hours watching television. However, we are also beginning to see a decline in television's power as new digital media, offering among many other things video on demand, continue to mature and spread. More recently, the broadcast journalists we have come to rely on have morphed and changed into the everyday man. No longer do we place these men and women on pedestals where their word was the truth. Now broadcast journalism has become instantaneous, reactionary, and not always done by professionals. Even satirists have shows that mimic the news and are accepted as receptacles for information. The changing face of broadcast journalism has allowed us to take in wider and broader ideas, but we are no longer as trusting to those faces as we once were.
A great broadcaster and gentleman, Doug Edwards, preceded me in this job, and another, Dan Rather, will follow.
As some of you now know, I have learned in the last couple of days that I have lung cancer.
Thank you to the thousands of wonderful professionals at CBS News.
It's not very often in my life I've been without words,